Okay, we're back at it. Academic freedom. Let me start by going back to tenure. Tenure was a process that was conceptualized and then put into effect, conceptualized in the 1890s by the American Association of University Professors, and then put into practice shortly thereafter, in response to several institutional firings of professors from their institutions for carrying out their work. I'm thinking of Edward Ross at Stanford College, Richard Ely, I think it was at the University of Wisconsin, G.B. Halstead at the University of Texas, Austin in 1903, Ross at Stanford College in 1900, for instance, was an economist who was on a lecture circuit, but would often speak at sorry y'all, organized labor rallies, and was very critical of capitalist labor practices, being exploitive, and so on. Particularly of the railroad tycoons. Well, it just so happened that Leland Stanford, Leland Stanford, who was a prime financier of the Transcontinental Railroad, and then, of course, the founder of Stanford College. His widow caught wind of Edward Ross. Heard that Edward Ross was criticizing his what he was doing outside of the school, and Stanford College fired him. Richard Ely, similar thing happened at the University of Wisconsin, and the university professors maintained that without some due protection, that is, tenure, without some protection, for professors simply carrying out their academic duties, that is, of analysis, analyzing, criticizing, suggesting, analyzing, criticizing social practices, ideas embodied in those social practices, reflected in those social practices, prevailing social habits, analyzing and criticizing such with the aim to suggest better ways to practice human life. Various is paramount to a democratic society. In order, if we're going to improve as a society, then that improvement does require identifying sore spots, identifying social problems, and the constituents of such social problems, and then therefore suggesting ways to improve. So there's an element of criticism in scholarly or academic work. And without the ability to do that, then the academic mission is undercut, and therefore part of the academic mission, or improving society, is one of the aims of the academic mission, not just simply extending our knowledge base or whatever. An important thing, don't get me wrong, don't let my facial expressions throw you there. But nevertheless, and so tenure was a conception, a stipulation attached to college, or added to university professors' contracts after they had met, a probationary period to warrant their worth or shown merit to or competency in the job. Was attached to their contracts, and all it means is that their due process rights, again, always apply. It was a means to protect professors in carrying out their academic freedom responsibilities. Again, what I mean by the term academic freedom is the right and responsibility. I'm putting on responsibility to criticize, analyze, criticize prevailing social practices, habits, beliefs, ideas, in terms of the consequences that they bring about, and evaluated according to some standard, in our case, a democratic standard, and to suggest better ways of practice, better ways of thinking, better systems of beliefs, values, and so on. I hope you get the idea. And so tenure was set up to protect professors carrying academic freedom issues. And it, at you know after and then that idea of tenure and then tenure filtered down to secondary or primary schools over the course of the early 20th century. Now, does this mean that it applied to public school teachers? Well, does this mean I can say and do any and everything I want to in a public school? Well, you want to say, of course not, and that's true. That's true. But what are the limits? What are the rules, precedent cases, principles that are applied and adjudicate in determining a public school teachers, I'm talking to secondary and elementary school teachers, academic freedom rights and responsibilities, and when they violate such responsibilities. Now, unlike other court cases, there is no one precedent case that establishes limits or principles or rules in adjudicating First Amendment issues. Now, academic freedom is protected by the First Amendment. It is all there is legally, conceptually, theoretically, and then thus legally. Academic freedom is protected by the First Amendment. That reads, as you probably all know, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So there are several rights listed or entailed or enumerated in that First Amendment, all of which cover teachers' academic freedom rights. That's okay, and that includes freedom of association, freedom of speech, of course, and to some degree, it has been argued at least, freedom of expression, to wear what they want to and so forth. We'll come back to that, I promise you. But again, there is no one precedent case. There are two. There are two cases I want to draw your attention to, and these are the second and third on this sheet. A low-tech sheet I'm going to hold up. You'll see the Luke case, the Parducci, Maryland Parducci versus Rutland, 1970. I'll explain these cases in a second and why they're important. The Roger Malloy versus Kiley, 1971. In the late 1960s, these are important for us. These cases were important in establishing the questions that courts apply to academic freedom issues in public schools. I'll show you that handout here in a second. Maryland Parducci, if you look this up, and that's why I put this up here so that you can look it up. Maryland Parducci was a teacher in I think it's Montgomery High School, but at Montgomery Public High School in late 1960s. 1967, I think, when this case comes up. 1968 is when it first, the issue originated. She was a recent graduate of Troy State University in the state of Alabama, certified as an English teacher, and she had assigned her, I want to say 11th grade. I can't remember the grade, and that is important. You'll see why that's important in the Roger Malloy case, but nevertheless, I want to say that it was an 11th grade class, but she assigned her class Kurt Vonnegut's Welcome to the Monkey House. Now, Kurt Vonnegut at the time, and I think Welcome to the Monkey House, I forget when it was published, the publication date, but it was current. An administrator walked by as they were discussing it and overheard the class discussing the text. And then a counselor and called her, went and told the principal. Principal called her in, and they informed her that they both considered Vonnegut's work, Welcome to the Monkey House, which is a short story, but also a series of short stories, literary garbage, and that it was unbecoming of her to to assign that text, and it was not fitting for children, for students. That it glorified licentious sex, and it glorified violence to old people, toward the elderly. At first, baffled, she couldn't understand. Perducci couldn't understand. What the big deal was. That first of all, she explained that she did not consider it literary garbage. That work met the criteria for defining a literary classic. They said they did not care, and that they were the final arbiters, and that the principal said that you will do not use this anymore. She refused, and they started the termination process, or fired or terminated her contract for insubordination. She filed suit. It goes to the appellate court. It went through the district court, local district court, and then the appellate court. The court in this particular case writes this, and this is important. The Supreme quote: "The Supreme Court has on numerous occasions emphasized that the right to teach, to inquire, to evaluate, to study is fundamental to a democratic society." That is academic freedom. The right to academic freedom, however, is not absolute and must be balanced against the competing interests of society. In order for the state to restrict the First Amendment, it must first demonstrate that the forbidden conduct would materially and substantially interfere with the operation of the school. When a teacher is forced to speculate as to what conduct is prescribed, he is apt to be overly cautious and reserved in the classroom. Such a reluctance on the part of the teacher to investigate and experiment with new and different ideas is anathema to the entire concept of academic freedom. Now, that passage is important for several reasons, because it establishes the first two questions that courts apply to academic freedom issues in schools, and these are as follows. Okay, the first you will see: does the situation at issue violate an established school board policy that is consistent with the U.S. Constitution? In Perducci's case, and here let me read these and then I'll come back. Secondly, does the situation cause or have the potential to cause material and substantial disruption of the operation of the school? That was text taken directly out of that quotation. Third, is the situation at issue consistent with the best scientific evidence about the psychological and social development of children at a given age? And finally, is the material what do I have here? Is the material of the situation relevant to the subject matter at hand? I'll come back to all four of these. Does the situation, take number one, does the situation at issue violate an established school board policy that is consistent with the U.S. Constitution? In Perducci's case, the court found that there was no school board policy dictating curriculum or dictating curriculum. That it was left. There were curricular guides for 11th grade English, but it wasn't. You will read X and so. The district English teachers in the school in the district agreed to read certain things, but also left to the teacher's discretion what material would help meet certain objectives. And so there was no established school board policy related to curriculum and reading list. And that is consistent with the U.S. Constitution. That is, we can't, again, much like contracts, we can't have a school board policy that somehow violates civil rights and so forth. That's all that means, consistent with the U.S. Constitution. Now, does the situation cause or have the potential to cause So the answer to the first one is that the situation did not violate an established school board policy. 2, does the situation cause or have the potential to cause material substantial disruption of the operation of the school? It comes right out of the passage that I just read. In this particular case, no. The only people who were upset were I think, a couple of parents refused to allow their children to read the text, and she assigned them other literature to read, more acceptable to them, literature acceptable to them, to meet the objectives of the assignment. The disruption that it caused, or the only ones who were upset really were the counselor and the principal. The third question is the situation at issue consistent with the best scientific evidence about the psychological and social development of children at a given age. That comes out of the Roger Malloy case, Malloy versus Kiley, 1971. Roger Malloy, again an English teacher, assigned his 11th grade class. And remember, how old are you in the 11th grade? 16, 17 years of age. I think it was an advanced English class in the state of, they were in the state of Massachusetts at the time. A short story that depicted rural Kentucky, rural 1930s Kentucky. And in the story, students filed into a classroom, and the expectations was that the girls would sit on one side of the class, the boys on the other, and that the class, the school day, the school day, but the school atmosphere and conditions favored the boys as the superior sex. And I forget the name of the short story. The topic of discussion was taboo. It was taboo to do X and so on. And one of the kids in the class said, "Well, that's ridiculous. That's the gender expectations in 1930 rural Kentucky is ridiculous." And so the Malloy says, "Yep, and there are things now that are just as ridiculous." And one of the kids said, "Like what? Give me an example." So, and they were talking about taboo. The concept under study was the concept of taboo. What is taboo? And so Malloy writes up on the board a 4-letter word, and then turns, or without saying it, he didn't say it. He just chalked it, as they claim in the court documents. He chalked it. He writes a 4-letter word up on the chalkboard, and then turns around to the class and he says, "Okay, this word is taboo. Give me a socially acceptable word or phrase that means the same thing." After some giggling, squirming around, one of the kids in the back of the class raised his or her hand and said, "Sexual intercourse." You can just imagine what the 4-letter word on the board was. Somehow, and I can't remember just from the court documents, I don't have it up here so that I can appeal to it quickly. The administrators find out and terminate Malloy's contract, or terminate his employment for conduct unbecoming to a teacher. Malloy files suit, in which, and this is important because for several reasons. The court in this case applied the decision of the Parducci case, and the two questions that really were implied in that case. Did his teaching method, for instance, violate an established school board policy, dictating method? And of course, clearly not. It did not cause a material substantial disruption. But while, and the judges were split on this issue, while the situation was unfortunate and perhaps not a, it was unfortunate. It wasn't gratuitous. That is, he didn't belabor the point. He made the point and then moved on in terms of as a heuristic device. He moved on to further consideration of taboo and the particulars of the text. So at the case, they had to draw in, to make a decision, they had to draw in sociologists and psychologists and ask, is, via testimony, what harm were kids of 17, 16, 17 years of age capable of handling such a distinction? Capable, not that they will, but capable of handling a distinction. And again, psychologists and sociologists somewhat mixed, though on the side, the prevailing side being that, of course, they've heard it numerous times throughout, that word is proliferated throughout culture, whether it be on the television, in their everyday parlance or whatever. But out of that case, and so they eventually sided with Malloy in this particular case. While it's an unfortunate use of use, is the situation at issue consistent with the best scientific evidence about the psychological and social development of children at a given age? Became the question applied. And then the fourth question, is the material of the situation relevant? Comes from a case in Kentucky. In last day of school, mathematics teacher filling out report cards. A student comes and says they were going to do nothing but sit there while the teacher filled out report cards. Can we watch this movie? And she says, yeah, of course. They put in the movie, but it was Pink Floyd's The Wall. Pink Floyd's The Wall. And again, I'm not sure how the administration found out. I don't know how it came to a legal head if students complained or whatever. But the teacher was fired for material on the grounds that the material, Pink Floyd's The Wall, first, she hadn't previewed it, and then secondly, but more importantly, that the material was irrelevant to math, to the subject matter at hand. So those are the four questions that courts typically apply in cases of academic freedom or issues with conflicts over academic freedom in schools. Now, let me run through some things right quick, some issues. Does this mean I can say and do any and everything I want to? No. Can school districts dictate or stipulate exactly what I will, the material I will use and the instructional method? Legally, yes, they can. As long as the doing so is related to an educational mission. Now, let me come back to that because that's important. Let me say something on censorship. Can school boards censor books? And you know what the answer is. Yes, they can, but they can't do so for arbitrary reasons. That is, school boards can't censor books simply because they disagree with the ideas represented in the books. They can't say you can't read Marx because we don't agree with Marx. The censorship has to be related to some vital educational objective. Whether, say, Catcher in the Rye, the art, Catcher, all kinds of books, whether that be what Harry Potter, more recently to Catcher in the Rye, Huck Finn, depicting racial tension in the South, or racism and racial tension in the South, or racial harmony, or friendship. There'd been that ground, the grounds too, or say Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield's language is gratuitous. Not something that we want to. Other educational means can be met via material other than Holden Caulfield's students having to endure Holden Caulfield's language and Catcher in the Rye. So school boards can censor and censor books. They can censor or dictate material and instructional method as long as those are connected to some vital educational mission. Okay. can I? So that gives you some idea of at least the material and substantial problems related to academic freedom. Let me go to just quickly. I need to do this quickly. Go to issues of issues of personal association and freedom of association issues. Let me come to that, but before I do so, now in the Tinker case, if you all remember the 1969 Tinker versus Des Moines, is from Des Moines. You know, the kids who wore the black armbands. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the specifics here. The Tinker in 1969. Just look that up. You'll find it. The Tinker kids wearing black armbands in protest of the the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, the Supreme Court decided in that case that neither teachers nor students yield up their civil rights at the schoolhouse door. And just because something may cause conflict doesn't necessarily mean, or may cause conflict, at least spoken ideological conflict, political conflict, doesn't mean that that needs to be, that is in somehow conditioned to abridge or restrict academic freedom. Schools are special places that should provide, they argued, should provide a sheltered experience for students to reasonably work through their conflicts, all in the name of a civil, to cultivate a civil society. That is the nature of the school, or at least one function of the school in a democratic society, to cultivate the values, capacities, habits of mind necessary for people, for citizens to work through their differences and conflicts in a civil, reasonable manner, holding to or beholding or judged against a democratic standard. That's important. There's going to be, I mean, there's a recognition that, look, there's going to be conflict. I mean, we live in a heterogeneous society that is culturally, socially, racially, economically, and so on. There are going to be differences. Schools really are a stage for such conflict, but the school, the mission of the school is to cultivate democratic habits, values, and methods by which to work through in a civil manner. You get. I can't reiterate that point. Situation just quickly, an example of that, of what I'm talking about here, a material substantial disruption. When I did my student teaching in 1989-ish, my supervising teacher, I did my student teaching near Clemson University up in the state of South Carolina in the foothills, a heavily textiled area, as much of all that area was at the time, since from 1920, hell, really 1900 to 1980 or so. My supervising teacher was an English teacher who shared an office with a social studies teacher, and he happened to be teaching a AP social studies class. And one of the 9 weeks that I was there, I was there for 9 weeks, 2 reporting periods, but one of the 9 weeks, the first 9 weeks or second 9 weeks, he had assigned his class. They were focusing on local history. Part of local history is, of course, economic structure of the local of the our location, our geographic location, and part of that economic history included capital labor strife. And he supplemented his what he was reading with tracts from the Ku Klux Klan, from a variety of Black Panthers, a variety of analyses that pointed up how capital, basically intimidated labor such that it would not unionize by virtue of using the Ku Klux Klan, by virtue of using armed guards to intimidate strikers, to intimidate people who were attempting to organize. Well, where I was at the school that I was at the time had basically had two types of students from the well-to-do corporate executives at said textile mills, or worker students. And once the parents of the executive parents found out, it became a problem. And there was a concerted effort to jam the phone lines at the school. They come to, and I know this only by virtue of sharing an office with this guy, the teacher. They come to the school and, come to the teacher. The principal comes to the teacher and says, "You must cease and desist. You have to stop using this material." They're jamming the phone. The parents are jamming the phone lines, complaining, and the operation of the secretaries can't continue. They can't carry out their daily routine and work. Or else, and the else was that we would fire you. Well, of course, as a teacher had tenure, he was in full recognition of his due process rights and what tenure entailed. He immediately got legal representation, who cited the Tinker case as part of his argument to the principal. It never made it past the principal, really. But the argument was that, look, in the Tinker case, and as well as other cases, the courts have maintained that simply because something does cause conflict doesn't mean that it should be that it amounts to material and substantial disruption of the function of the school. The principal agreed that was true, that the only disruption was that the phone lines were jammed, that the other relationships within the schools, including student to student and teacher to student, was not, those relationships were not affected, and agreed to let this go. That didn't stop parents from calling, but it did. Nothing happened. No physical violence, or it didn't disrupt other relationships within the school. Though courts do give a lot of leeway to administrators in defining what constitutes material and substantial disruption. It's a gray term, so to speak. It's a vague, nebulous, and on purpose, because look, administrators have a great responsibility in maintaining a condition, school conditions that are conducive to the psychological, emotional, and physical well-being of students, that are conducive to educational objectives, to educational ends. And so the courts have traditionally given great leeway to administrators in defining what constitutes those conditions that are inconducive to those educational ends. There's something else here. Freedom of association. Does this mean, for instance, I can come out as part of in my own time? Look, courts have maintained and have recognized that teachers are citizens. Neither teachers nor students yield up their civil rights to the court at the schoolhouse door, the Supreme Court said in Tinker. Teachers are people, citizens, as much as they are civil servants. And therefore, their civil rights do apply to them and in schools. However, teachers are in the uncanny, peculiar position of not only explicitly shaping moral behavior in children or students, but also must serve as exemplars. And insofar as that their private life, such that their private life, their rights as a private citizen, has to be balanced against the needs of society at any given point in time and in any particular situation or local geographic area. So, does this mean that I can come out and say, as part of an organization. I don't even know what I was going to say as part of a. I have examples, but as part of a, I don't want to say as a racial superiority group. I'm kind of blanking on that. Can I come out in the gay pride? Easy enough. Can I come out in the gay pride march? And of course you can. Can I? Good gracious, here. Can I be? Can I come out as now? Can I come out as in the march in the Communist Party parade, if there is such a thing? I don't know. Well, I think you get the idea. That is, what are the limits on freedom of association as determined by those four questions? It's part of academic freedom. It's part really of First Amendment freedom of association rights. The important, there are several things, and it falls under, does it cause material and substantial disruption of the school? It can't violate, those things cannot violate an established school board policy, because they would be in not keeping with the civil rights as in the First Amendment. However, schools, individuals' rights the rights of teachers as individual citizens have to be balanced against the needs of society. The Mark Morrison case, which is a 1969 case. Again, I don't know the title of the case, like Morrison versus, if you just simply Mark, M-A-R-C, Mark Morrison, 1969. Mark Morrison was a gay guy who was dating a teacher in his school. It was a teacher who was gay and was dating a teacher in the school he taught at in the Oakland Bay Area in the 1960s. And Morrison, the teacher, moved to another school a little further away, I think, and Morrison wanted to break off his relationship with the teacher, and the teacher basically was going to blackmail him. That is, the teacher said, if you break off the relationship, I'll tell your principal, and he will fire you for conduct unbecoming homosexuality, for conduct unbecoming to a teacher. Morrison breaks off the relationship. In fact, the teacher calls the principal, tells the principal that he and Morrison were in a relationship, and the principal fires or attempts to terminate Morrison for conduct unbecoming to the teacher, unbecoming to a teacher. What did the court rule? The court ruled that the school board cannot dismiss a teacher for personal behavior simply because it disapproves, especially when the behavior does not affect the teacher's ability to carry out the obligations of the position. In order to check if the behavior affects the ability to teach, the school board must consider all contextual considerations. That is, relationship with students, relationship in carrying out the ability of the teacher to carry out functions, characteristic of the job, relationship with personnel, other school personnel and administrators. Dismissal is warranted only if further employment will harm students, staff, and administrators. In this case, there was no, the students knew he was gay. That was no big deal. Other staff members knew Morrison was gay. Not a big deal to them. And it hadn't affected any of their relationships. However, teachers have been terminated for things such as becoming pregnant. Kathleen Sullivan, Kathleen Sullivan, South Dakota, 1976. You simply type in Kathleen Sullivan, Sullivan, South Dakota, 1976. Not that she became pregnant. Kathleen Sullivan, in a small rural South Dakota town, was living with her boyfriend. The community found out. Parents in the community found out and didn't like it. that they were living together unmarried and so forth. The principal tells her to stop. She doesn't. She's dismissed because of conduct unbecoming to a teacher. It violated social norms and expectations. The court ruled that privacy interest must be weighed against educational purpose and function and the prevailing social values. And in this case, the court upheld her dismissal. This is an area, freedom of association, freedom of expression in this way when outside of school is a gray. I can only tell you to err on the side of caution. And I'll come back to that in terms of social media in just a second. Look, I'm the kind of person, personally, I'm just speaking from personal experience and personal experience. I'm the kind of person who believes that as long as your behavior outside of school is not harming a soul, then that is protected. So that's a protected First Amendment, protected by the First Amendment. Those rights of association, rights of expression, press, and so on. What you do outside of school, as long as it's private, as long as it's not harming anybody, that's your business. However, it's not at all or consistently seen that way. Particularly now that you all have this thing called social media, which we didn't have back in the day. So you didn't get in trouble for posting your picture at the bar having a beer, or pictures of yourself. I'll give you a couple of examples. There was a teacher in Altamont Springs area, and this has been 10, maybe even 15 years ago. I can't remember, but it was not so long ago that Facebook was new. So however long that is, I don't know. Facebook. She posts a picture on Facebook that her students had access to of her at a bar during New Year's Eve, holding a cup up, a mug of beer up, and that was the grounds for her termination, conduct unbecoming to a teacher. Now I'm sure, completely legal, but I'm sure there must have been something underneath that that was underneath all that. That is, it had to be something more to that. There was a teacher, for instance, who was working on a fishing boat in a bikini. She, teacher during the week, but was a fishing mate. I'm speaking of things I don't know much about. They deep sea fishing boats, but her task was to be out there in a bikini, or she wore a bikini. I don't know, but that was conduct unbecoming to a teacher. Completely legal. But it was construed as violating the expectations, norms that is required of being a teacher. So if you err, look, with this social media stuff, I'd just erase it. I'd get rid of it, because school districts have entire departments whose purpose, or the purpose of which, is to probe or to inquire into candidates and teachers' online personas. I mean, they're researching. They're looking into it. You want to be very, very, very careful who you let, what you post, and who can access it, because you never can tell. Err on the side of caution. I'll do this fairly quickly, and then I'll have to come back. I'll have to come back at some other time, the next video next week, to discuss religion. Religion will be important, but I just want to get to personal appearance right quick before I run out of time. It's often said that. Well, it's not often said. It's claimed that the First Amendment covers personal appearance for both teachers and students. That by virtue of freedom of expression, teachers and students should be able to dress as a form of expression any way they want to, is under given certain restrictions. I'll come to this in a minute. Let me. The Supreme Court has not dealt with this in any precedent case, but let me show you a map. Bear with me. Hopefully I won't turn this off. Hopefully you can see said map. If that didn't work, in the back of the legal text there is that same map. That's a map that shows you the 13, well, there's 13, there's 11, there are 11 represented there. You have Alaska as well. The 11 Federal Circuit Courts of Appeal. The last question on this law test. If you get this wrong, I'm going to be so upset. I'm giving you the answer to this. The last question asks, identify the Federal Court of Appeals of which Florida is a part, and that is the 11th. Now, courts of the federal appeals circuit courts of appeals, federal circuit courts of appeals, are split on this issue of dress. First of all, every one of those districts have maintained and have decided in favor of school districts to restrict teacher appearance, dress, as well as grooming. And they do so on the grounds that it's the administrators and school districts' responsibility to maintain a professional cadre of professionals, and that includes dictating or restricting what they can wear and what they can't wear. So school districts, of course, and you all know this, I'm not saying anything you don't know, can restrict teacher dress and appearance. However, when teachers do appeal, they appeal on the grounds that the dress, that the rules, but the rules have to be stipulated. They have to be explicit. You can't leave, much like curriculum, you can't leave teachers, there has to be an established policy that teachers are aware of, that is public and open to their access, that they can access. You can't leave them guessing as to the nature of grooming and then punish them after the fact. It has to be explicit, and they have to have knowledge of it or access to the publication. But when teachers do appeal, they appeal on the grounds that the policy is arbitrary, that there is no educational purpose to it, that it's discriminatory. Arbitrary, unreasonable, or discriminatory. For instance, discriminatory, requiring male teachers to dress formally, but not requiring female teachers to dress formally. That's an example of discrimination or discriminatory policy. Arbitrary, there isn't the policy does not work toward, is not the means toward some specified educational objective. That's less likely unreasonable. There have been teachers who have applied or have appealed that the policy is ridiculous given the working conditions. For instance, there have been teachers in the state of Hawaii who have argued that formal dress policies or policies that require formal dress for teachers are unreasonable given the heat circumstances in Hawaii. Similarly, teachers in the state of Louisiana have filed suit arguing that that such policies, requiring formal dress, are unreasonable given the heat in the bayou. Teachers have lost that case in Louisiana, but won in other cases. So it really just depends. In terms of student dress, go back to that map Districts 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, and 9, and maybe 10. I can't remember. I'd have to go back and look. There's several of them there. 1, 2, 4, 7, 8. You'll see this in the text. Recognize student dress as protected speech. The other ones, including our own in the 11th, do not consider dress as protected by the First Amendment, protected speech or expression. They see it as symbolic speech, but not protected political speech. And the difference, of course, is if you make a political statement, that's protected speech. More that we grant legally, we grant more protection to political speech than we do just a mere symbolic speech that may or may not imply a meaning or carry a meaning. For instance, though you can't get by with this at all anymore. I mean, this is not allowed in schools at all. I'll give you an example of what used to be protected political speech and then merely symbolic speech. A student wears a shirt to school. It has a marijuana leaf on it, and underneath it says legalize. So there's very little wiggle room as to the meaning of that symbol, legalize. Whereas that's protected, or it used to be, protected political speech. Or it is protected political speech, but just not speech that is going to be welcomed given the educational mission in public schools. That is to maintain a drug-free and alcohol-free context. As opposed to a shirt that simply had a marijuana leaf on it. That could mean anything. That's just merely symbolic speech. The districts that do not see student dress as protected political speech, see it as merely symbolic, and they give great leeway to school boards in controlling that dress in grooming. In the districts that do see it as protected political speech, they still allow districts to restrict student dress under certain conditions. And I want to say here that these are conditions that school boards legitimately do have conditions under which school boards genuinely do have a right to restrict student dress, and they are concerned with these restrictions are, and this will be an item on your test under dress. They can restrict students in terms of for health reasons, sanitation, health reasons, for safety reasons. They have to maintain a safe environment. They can't have children or students walking around with big long chains hanging out of their pockets to their wallets, or spikes that could hurt them, and so forth. Anything that causes a disruption, that's a sticky, or that may incite to violence. Anything that's racist, of course, is not only going to be loathsome, but also could incite violence. We'll get or disruption. Gang colors, for instance. School boards have restricted students from wearing blue and red in some places because there had been a history of disruption related to gangs. And then they have the responsibility to maintain a climate conducive, a healthy respect for authority. Now, that's, again, that much like disruption is left to the reasonableness or to the discretion of administrators. What is a healthy respect for authority? I have some examples on that point, but I don't think I need to belabor this. The important things about these two videos is that one, it sets out contracts, generic traits of contracts, know what those are, pay attention to what the test prompts ask of you, the directions, generic traits, due process rights, where it asks, lists, or describe or explain due process rights of teachers. You list those procedures. The 4 questions that I have identified, they will not be in the textbook, so don't rely on that textbook. This video will, I mean, this video is going to help you in relation to that question on the exam. And then those 4 questions apply not only to because the First Amendment applies not only to issues of direct academic freedom for teachers in classrooms, but also for dress, freedom of association as well. Next time I'll come back with religion as a follow-up to this, because I needed to talk about this here, but I'm already at my 55 minutes and I need to stop. But I will come back with the extent to which schools can discuss the relationship between religion and state as manifested in public schools being representative of the state. Secondly, and then what I want to focus on next time is teacher liability, reporting child abuse, and defamation of character. Those will be the 3 items of discussion next time I return. All right, so